Opportunities at mta.maryland.gov.
State Circle is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you.
Who wins and who loses under the new tax law?
I think we have a responsibility to say we should give this back to people.
Lawmakers focus on new gun legislation.
It is troubling and it's a shame, but I think we need to act proactively.
And partisanship is set aside in the fight against opioids.
The guys that handle pain, it's a tough job. It really is.
Connecting Marylanders to their government. This is State Circle.
Good evening. The big story around State Circle this week is your changing tax bill. There's a new report examining how the new federal tax law will affect Maryland and Maryland residents. It may set up a fight over state taxes, as Nancy Amato reports.
Under our proposed legislation, Marylanders will not pay 1 cent more in state taxes as a result of the actions at the federal level.
Governor Larry Hogan stood with his newly assembled team of negotiators tasked with creating a bipartisan solution to the fallout from the federal tax bill. He's vowing to insulate Maryland taxpayers from owing an estimated $400 million more in state and local taxes next year.
Our proposal does 2 things to address this problem. First, our bill makes permanent a provision in Maryland law that prevents changes in the federal tax code from affecting Maryland state and local taxes. Second, under our legislation, if a person chooses to take the standard deduction at the federal level, you would still be able to itemize and take that deduction at the state level.
Comptroller Peter Francho's report, prepared by the Maryland Bureau of Revenue Estimates, indicates 71%, or a little over 2 million Marylanders, will see a reduction in their federal taxes. 13% will face an increase, and 16% will see no change at all. How much you'll owe will depend on factors such as how much you make, if you have children, or file individually or jointly. One big change, a loss of itemized deductions, including a $10,000 cap on federal deductions that can be claimed for state and local tax payments. On the other hand,
the federal standard deduction has doubled. It's in many taxpayers' benefit to take the federal standard deduction now. That means they have to take the state standard deduction.
Based on the numbers, the Comptroller's office predicts charities may end up suffering if more people forego itemized deductions and take a standard deduction instead.
As the Comptroller said, we would hope that everyone would continue their level of altruism, but it's just not going to be there at the current level. It's just not. People respond to financial incentives.
At least one Republican lawmaker says he hopes his colleagues will embrace Governor Hogan's plan to return the unexpected windfall back to Maryland taxpayers.
I think we have a responsibility to say we should give this back to people. We should hold the line and not take extra money out of people. That wasn't the intention at the federal level.
Comptroller Francho says he's cautiously optimistic that the federal tax bill will deliver on its promises and benefit Maryland.
I think the bottom line is that the majority of Marylanders are going to benefit from this tax legislation, at least in the short term. What remains to be seen is whether this plan provides long-term economic growth.
I'm Nancy Yamada for State Circle.
The opioid epidemic has had a devastating impact here in Maryland, with Anne Arundel County particularly hard hit. Charles Robinson looks at how the county is fighting to save lives.
The opioid crisis is an immense challenge for Anne Arundel County. Opioids are public enemy number 1.
The flashing red warning lights tell only part of the story of how heroin usage surged last year in Anne Arundel County. That's when 155 people died.
It is an epidemic. I mean, it nationally, it kills more people than guns in the United States of America today. And it is killing more people than automobile accidents within young people.
In the rarefied air of bipartisanship in Annapolis, the Democrat Speaker of the House and the Republican County Executive agree. They convened a hearing of various stakeholders. Dr. Eric Weintraub had a number of observations. Most users began using prescribed opioids and then turned to heroin. Many of the drug overdoses are caused by the deadly mix of heroin and fentanyl. Anne Arundel County isn't waiting to decide what to do about the opioid epidemic. In fact, they're being proactive. They've designated firehouses as safe spaces. In addition to that, they have an informational campaign they call Not My Child. To attack the problem, the legislature wants to crack down on so-called pill mills and the doctors who are writing pain medications.
The guys that handle pain, it's a tough job. It really is. So I think we need to get to them and help them and provide support.
The governor is on board with helping stem the tide. He's included an additional $3.7 million in the budget. He's also floated the idea of converting Baltimore City Jail, which he closed earlier, into a large-scale treatment center. In Annapolis, I'm Charles Robinson for State Circle.
Governor Hogan is calling on the legislature and his new negotiating team to address health care. He says lawmakers need to come up with a plan to stabilize the insurance market and prevent further massive rate increases.
Let me be very clear. The stakes here are tremendous. If nothing is done, rates will increase by at least 50% in the individual market. It's possible that the market could entirely collapse. Thousands could lose their health care coverage.
The governor said the state's Medicare waiver is in jeopardy, potentially costing the state $2 billion a year. Even though they're in the process of still being drafted, 2 gun safety bills are gaining attention in Annapolis. Yolanda Vasquez has more on that story.
Members from Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense rally in Annapolis.
So this is the year that we're going to do it, and we're going to do it with your help.
As legislators push for a bill that would take away firearms from those convicted of domestic violence crimes.
So it puts in place a process where that person can give their weapon and has to give their weapon to the court or to a federally licensed firearm dealer.
Current law prohibits offenders from purchasing firearms. This provision would require them to turn in any guns they already own.
In many cases, this legislation would have protected or saved lives. So it was really touching to hear a lot of the stories of the men and women that came down from all across Maryland.
Saving lives is the intention behind Delegate Kathy Shalega's bill. She wants people to feel less vulnerable while at their place of worship.
The door's behind you. So a bad guy coming in behind you, you have no idea. You're just really a sitting duck.
Her newly drafted legislation would allow any religious organization to designate a person who is licensed to carry a firearm onto their property for the purpose of protection.
So we think this is just clarifying that will say you may permissibly transport your firearm legally to church and then carry that firearm on church property or a religious institution as long as you have permission by the church board or the pastor.
While the idea for this bill originated in Harford County, Delegate Shalega thought it would be best to introduce it on a statewide level, mainly for the benefit of religious organizations in rural counties.
I know Carroll County is very interested. You know, they don't have their own law enforcement. So Carroll County uses the state police. And so, you know, some of their rural churches and synagogues and mosques don't have anybody close by.
The deadly shooting at a small Baptist church in rural Texas is the exact scenario Shalega is working hard to prevent, with legislation that would allow churchgoers to worship in peace.
It is troubling and it's a shame, but I think we need to act proactively and not wait for one of these horrible things to happen here.
In Annapolis, I'm Yolanda Vasquez for State Circle.
Top legislators are creating a new commission to deal with workplace harassment issues. Legislative leaders named a 14-member panel this week to review state policy dealing with sexual harassment claims in all 3 branches of government. The commission is made up of 12 women and 2 men from both the public and private sectors.
We're going to come up with rules, regulations, and put them in place and bring them to the General Assembly, the governor, and the chief judge. See if we can come up with some uniform rules, regulations for all 3 branches of government.
The commission will also hear public testimony. The first meeting is on February the 16th. Members of the Board of Public Works had lots of questions this week about why Baltimore schools had to close during that cold snap. The governor, the comptroller, and the state treasurer heard from state officials on why so many boilers in the Baltimore City system failed. The governor said he put additional money in the budget to assist with getting systems back online and rejected claims about a lack of funding. City school officials later briefed legislators on their progress. Our newsmaker this week is Peter Francho, the comptroller of Maryland. Sir, thank you for being with us.
Jeff, it's a pleasure.
Your office has concluded this report on the impact of the new federal tax law. It is complicated. It's an excellent report. It's dense, though. Boil it down for people. What do you want legislators to know? What do you want taxpayers to know about these changes?
Well, first of all, for your listeners who are interested in all this, and everybody's interested in their taxes, what the Congress did at the end of last year was pass the most far-reaching, really unbelievably far-reaching rewrite of the country's tax laws, I think, in my lifetime. And so what we're dealing with at the state level is what exactly was passed, what's the impact on Maryland taxpayers. We decided, rather than trying to think about it from an ideological or even a policy perspective and take a sample and extrapolate from the sample what we think will be happening, we took an entire tax year, 2.4 million electronically filed tax returns, and put them through a simulation of what was passed out of the conference committee. And it had some very interesting results in it, which is that 71% of Marylanders are going to benefit from the federal tax system. Recommendations, they're going to get a tax cut. Disposable income will rise by $3.5 billion in calendar year 2018. That's going to give an enormous economic boost to the state's sluggish economy. Now, offsetting that are some individuals in Maryland that are going to be paying higher federal taxes, but not obviously close anywhere near the majority. And then there are also some unintended consequences at the state level of individuals that are going to be paying approximately $400 million more in state and local taxes. So that's the kind of the takeaway from this action is, number one, the scale and complexity of what was done in Congress behind closed doors with no public hearings is really we're almost unable to describe how far-reaching it is. But in dealing with it, we're actually figuring out what the specifics are as to how it affects the Maryland tax situation.
Well, one thing I took away from the report is that it's very hard to generalize and say that for the average two-income, middle-class Maryland family, the effect of this is going to be X.
Well, it's hard to have a crystal ball about human behavior on anything, but you're right. This has some imponderables in it. We made some assumptions in the report. But the significance of this being the first in the country that's ever done this kind of actual analysis using real tax returns is that the policymakers, the governor and the legislators, have a chance to see something that's much more clear than just the normal rough figures that are bandied about. So you can skip all of the partisanship, you can skip all of the ideology and all of the favoritism that you might have. In that report are the facts about what the impact will be to the extent we can see it. But you're right that there are always going to be nuances and changes based on people either getting advice or not following advice or just acting on their own. There's going to be some imponderables there.
What would Comptroller Francho like to see happen in this legislative session?
Well, I have done what I thought was the appropriate thing, which is do a fact-based analysis rather than my views. If
they don't do anything, your revenues are going to go up. Well, is that okay?
Well, my suggestion to the policymakers is that they take the information that we have and come up with recommendations that they think make sense. We're happy to run them back through the system again and make sure, number one, that they're accurate, and number two, that we're able to implement them. There are limitations in a tax system to what you can do. We can't just create out of the sky brand new auditing programs that the state's responsible for without obviously making adjustments. Now, nobody cares about me implementing the taxes. I understand that, but I definitely want the policymakers to, whatever they come up with, have it based upon good figures, and I think that's our contribution.
So, I mean, the governor wants to have the legislature do something, and there's a range of possibilities to make sure that the state doesn't get this unintended windfall of $400 million or so in the following fiscal year. Is that something you would support?
Well, it's something that I would take a look at. Obviously, I would like people to have as much disposable income in their pockets as possible, because we have a consumer-driven economy. It's been sluggish for 9 years. I'm getting a little frustrated with it. I'd love to see it hitting on all cylinders. This short-term stimulus may, in fact, be something that's terrific. Or it may just be a flash in the pan. A couple of years from now, it all dies away, and we're back to the same sluggishness. But I think I'm still in obviously, I'd like people to pay less taxes, but I also am concerned about the integrity of the system that we have and the obligations that we have as a state. So I'm not putting myself into that debate and saying, you should do this or you should do that. I'm there more as a referee saying, whatever you come up with, I'll give you a very good idea of how much it's going to cost to implement.
Okay, you do have a suggestion for the legislature on another topic on breweries and how they sell beer to the public. In a nutshell, what needs to be changed there?
Well, we have an $800 million sector right now brewing craft beer. It could be much bigger. We employ 6,500 Marylanders. We have $288 million in salaries. That could be quintupled over the next few years if we just remove some regulatory impediments concerning the operation and transportation and sale of these products. I'm not suggesting we sell more beer to people. I'm just saying, why don't we sell more of the beer that Maryland drinks, have it be produced in Maryland, because that's good for the economy, rather than, and substitute it for the out-of-state beer that we're currently consuming.
As you know, there are a ton of entrenched interests when it comes to all forms of liquor. You have bars, you have distributors. How much buy-in do you have from the industry?
Well, quite a bit from the craft brewing industry, obviously, but you're right. It's a very difficult climate for change in this area because it's so protected by special interests. But I'm optimistic because the young people of the country and of this state really want these products, and it's very hard to stand in the way of progress, Jeff, and say, no, we're going to drink Budweiser and Coors and Miller. Well, guess what? Nobody likes that kind of beer anymore. They want all of the Flying Dog and other wonderful craft brewers that have sprung up in Maryland. So I think we're going to suggest that if we simply let the free enterprise system in, I know capitalism is a strange system, but it actually works, and let the market determine who the winners and losers are in the beer area, and have the state step back from protecting the incumbents right now, which is what we're doing.
Comptroller Peter Franchot, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Jeff.
And we're back with the Political Roundtable right after this.
Are you turning 70 and a half this year? If so, you generally have to start spending down your retirement account. Even the minimum distribution can place you in a sticky situation. Luckily, you can now use your IRA to make tax-free gifts. Gifts up to $100,000 will never count as income, but always make a difference. That's icing on the cake.
Make your gift for this year before December 31st. Visit mpt.org/support.
This is a box that showed you a world beyond your own. It was just a box, but the world has changed, and so have we. And now the box can be almost any size or shape. decide what you want to explore. Anytime, any place. Break out of the box with PBS.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood.
We are the curious.
Wow!
The adventurous.
Oh!
Those venturing out for the first time.
And those who've never lost our sense of wonder.
Whoa. You seen this?
We are the hungry.
The strong.
I must be the greatest.
The joyful.
A happy little cloud. We believe there is always more we can uncover.
More we can explore.
We believe
in the capacity for goodness. And the potential for greatness.
The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans.
PBS. PBS.
PBS.
Now back to the State House, where Charles Robinson is joined by Danielle Gaines of the Frederick News Post. Thank you very much for being with us. And there was a little bit of action this week on a behind-the-scenes process that sets the salaries for legislators. What happened there?
Yeah, so there's the General Assembly Compensation Commission, and they only get action once every 4 years in the last year of a term, and they make a recommendation on what the salary for lawmakers should be in the next term. This year, that Compensation Commission has decided to keep the salaries the same. So lawmakers starting in 2019 will receive a salary of $50,330, which is what they receive now. The Speaker of the House and the Senate President get a slightly higher salary.
So does this commission get fired or something for not suggesting a pay raise? Is that uncommon?
No, it's not uncommon. A lot of states have a commission like this. It's basically a way to try to keep lawmakers from voting on their own salaries. So they're voting on the salary for the next term, not the one that they're currently serving in.
There was some change to the benefits structure. Anything meaningful?
There are some minor tweaks to the pension system, what age certain people can start to take their beneficiary credits and stuff like that, but nothing major.
Early movement in the legislature on Charles, what in the past has been a really contentious issue, looking at the parental rights in cases of rape. I know on the House side, I think it's House Bill 1 this year, which tells you that it's a priority of the legislative leadership.
Yeah, this was an emergency piece of legislation that the governor had put in, and it's been co-filed. It's Senate Bill 2 on the Senate side. What's very interesting about this is they want to crack down on parental rights, and this is associated with people who've either been convicted of rape and or have had a rape. I guess it's civil court, a civil issue. But the whole idea here is that you would lose your parental rights that would go back to a rapist. And a lot of people see this as a really big deal.
Yeah, if a judge finds you that a child is conceived of rape, they can terminate the rights of that parent. And
the reason, I mean, it's been proposed, I think, going back a decade. It's complex because not every case results in a criminal conviction, so you had to set some sort of standard for a judge to use in making that determination. But it sounds like there's pretty close to full agreement in the legislature on this.
Yeah, this is one of those bills that is coming down the pike, and it's coming down early. We're into 3 weeks of this, and we got our first major piece of legislation that's coming across the desk, and we should have an answer by, I think, Tuesday is what they're talking about.
There should be votes on both chambers on the floor next week, and legislative leaders have voiced their support for passing it this year.
Danielle, I saw you had a chance to do a sit-down interview with Governor Hogan. What was the focus on that? What was the big takeaway?
I did. We sat down, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about the Amazon deal and Metro funding. Specific to Frederick County, we wanted to talk about the gerrymandering case quite a bit. So the governor has filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court in favor of the plaintiffs in that case. They're challenging the lines drawn for the 6th district, which includes all of Western Maryland and part of Montgomery County. And he's filed that brief with former California Governor Gray Davis, who's a Democrat. So that's a bipartisan effort that he wants to get other governors to join as well.
But Danielle, you didn't ask him about the plunge. That's what everybody's talking about today. There is a major fundraiser going on at Sandy Point, and the governor actually spoke to the folks down there, but he didn't jump in the water.
I did get a preview of the State of the State address.
Showing some good judgment, I'd say. Sorry.
Yeah, but so next week we also get the State of the State from the governor. It'll be interesting to hear his take on where we are. Obviously, a lot of things that happen at the federal level are impacting us here in the state. That includes everything from health care to taxes, and I guess he'll kind of inform us a little bit more on where he thinks the state should go.
Charles, how about you and I broadcast that speech? Maybe 12 noon Wednesday here on MPT. Does that fit your calendar?
Yeah, that's right up my alley. I think that's going to work well.
Very good. Charles and Danielle, thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that is our program for this week. Tune in every week at this time as we bring the State House to your house. You can also connect with State Circle online, streaming videos of our programs. They can be found at video.mpt.tv. And please follow us on Twitter at MPT News. Now, for all of us here at MPT, I'm Jeff Salkin. Thanks for watching and have a good night.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.
Artworks is MPT's weekly on-air arts salon.
My motivation is a very personal one.
Get the insider track on artists from across the country and the world.
Our artists are an eclectic group of creative minds.
Discover our area's diverse artists, musicians, and writers.
Our village was a repository of dreams.
Join Rhea Fiken and her local co-hosts every week on Artworks. Tonight at 7:30 on MPT.
Public Square on MPT.